Welcome to Prayer Station. If you think you're a good person, then maybe this gospel isn't for you. Jesus didn't come to reward the righteous. He came to die for the hopeless. He didn't choose the ones who always get it right. He chose those who have been wrong. And the scariest part is, God justifies the ungodly. You can live a moral life and still lose your soul. You can earn the praise of people but still be unseen by God. Because the gospel doesn't open for those who strive. It opens for those who surrender. And the question for you today is not, are you good enough? But rather, are you willing to let go and believe? The illusion of morality. I used to think I was fine. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't steal. I didn't do drugs, start fights, or harm others. I was kind to my neighbors, respectful to elders, worked hard, didn't lie, didn't cheat. I believed that was enough. I believed that heaven, if it existed, must surely be for people like me. I wasn't perfect, but I wasn't terrible either. Wounded by the law, I began to encounter God's word. Not because I was seeking him, but because I wanted to know more. I read the Bible like a treasure of wisdom. I expected encouragements, moral lessons, and there were. But not only that. For the first time I came across verses like, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind." I paused. I didn't hate God, but did I love him like that? Then, "Be holy, for I am holy." I had never dared call myself holy. I thought that was for pastors, prophets, or super spiritual people. And anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I froze, not because I had never done that, but because I had, too often. I realized the Word of God didn't just address behavior. It pierced thoughts, motives, the deepest roots of the soul. The law didn't strike hands. It pierced the heart. It wasn't about what I did, but about who I was. I used to think the law was a path to heaven, but the more I walked it, the farther I felt from the light. I thought, if I just try harder, it'll be fine. But the harder I tried, the more I broke down. The law didn't save me. It exposed me. It stripped me. It was a mirror, reflecting every stain I tried to cover with morality. I started to fear, not God, but what his light was revealing in me. I didn't realize God doesn't compare us to others. He looks at our nature, and my nature, no matter how noble I tried to appear, was that of a soul separated from true life. I lived in illusion. The illusion that morality could replace righteousness. The illusion that doing good was enough. Hide and rescue yourself. After feeling the weight of the law, I didn't turn around. I detoured. I began to compensate. I joined the worship team. I served regularly, attended services, small groups, and evangelism. Every act made me feel better. For a while, though, deep down I lacked real peace. I thought if I did enough good works, the guilt would fade. I thought if I built God's kingdom, he would overlook the darkness in me. I was trying to repay grace with effort, but in truth I was hiding from grace with religion. I started comparing myself again. I'm not like that arrogant guy. I don't live in obvious sin like her. I'm still serving. Surely that counts for something, right? I built a new system of pseudo-righteousness. If I still attend church, if I'm still active in ministry, if people still see me as spiritual, then I must be okay. I use schedules, ministry roles, and compliments to cover a hole in my soul. I posted Bible verses on my walls, but none on my heart. I read the word each morning not to listen, but to silence the guilt. I knew I had sinned, but instead of confessing it, I buried it in religious activity. I didn't repent, I worked harder. But the harder I tried, the more fake I felt. I wasn't worshiping, I was performing. I wasn't praying, I was negotiating. I wasn't living in God's love. I was trying to protect my spiritual image. And the most painful truth was I was afraid of forgiveness. Because if I were truly forgiven, I'd have no more reason to prove myself. I'd have to face the truth. I had nothing to offer for my salvation. Exposed. I thought I could hide forever. I lived two parallel lives. One was the version I showed the world, a young leader, passionate, upright. The other, the real me, was full of uncontrolled desires, dark thoughts, and ever-widening cracks. I thought if I kept the outside steady, the inside would follow. I thought if no one saw my sin, it would disappear. I was wrong. One day everything crumbled. I didn't commit a massive scandal, just a small truth leaked. A careless word, an unguarded act, a knowing glance from someone, enough to explode the image I built on morality. I was seen. I was exposed, dragged out of my safe facade. I was no longer the leader, no longer the model believer. I was just a sinner, with nothing left to hide. I thought the world would hate me, but the most terrifying thing, though, wasn't others' eyes. It was my own. When I looked in the mirror, I used to see someone strong. Now I saw someone tired. I used to see a devout soul. Now just an empty shell, cracked, scorched, and hollow. No one left to compare myself to. No mask left to hide behind. The truth was painfully clear. I didn't need anyone to condemn me. I had already condemned myself. And in that moment, I realized something. Sin isn't just about bad actions. Sin is living outside the light, living in pretense. I couldn't pretend anymore. And strangely, that was the beginning of truth. Self-condemnation. I thought that after being exposed, the worst thing would be shame. I was wrong. Shame was only the first flame, the flame that burned image, reputation, and pride. But what truly scorched my soul was the familiar whisper from within. You are no longer worthy. You've gone too far. You can't come back. I didn't hear those words from others, but from my own heart. I condemned myself. I didn't need anyone to push me out of the community because I had already withdrawn in silence. No one forbade me from praying, but I no longer dared to speak to God. I went to church, but I couldn't lift my eyes. I listened to the sermons, but every promise seemed meant for someone else. Phrases like God forgives all sins no longer worked on me. I thought, all sins except mine. I began to live like a ghost in the house of God. I read the Bible, but only to find reasons why I didn't belong. I saw myself in Judas, not Peter. I saw myself as Esau, the one rejected. I saw myself without a place to stand. I no longer asked for forgiveness. I didn't believe I had the right. I lived in a kind of depressed faith, believing God existed, but I had already been cut off from grace. I didn't blame God. I blamed myself, because I knew I was wrong. I knew I had been pretending. I knew I had lived a double life. And I believed I deserved to be cast out. That was the season when I thought there was no hope left. I didn't turn my back on God. I just fell into a pit where His light no longer reached me. But I was wrong. It wasn't that His light couldn't reach me. It was that I no longer dared to turn my face toward the light. A call from the darkness. I no longer prayed. Not because I didn't believe God was listening, but because I believed He no longer wanted to hear me. I still walked into church, still sang, still nodded when others shared. But my spirit had gone dark. I wasn't living, I was surviving. Not a child of light, but one lost in the shadows, carrying the memory of light but too afraid to step toward it. I held on to one belief: that His grace was big enough for the addict, the outsider, the repentant murderer, but not big enough for the one who had known and still betrayed. I thought He might forgive them, but not me, because I had known better. I had once walked close, and I still turned away. Then one rainy afternoon, as I sat quietly in an old room, a Bible verse surfaced. Not something I looked for, not something I remembered, but as if someone placed it gently in my mind. God justifies the ungodly. I froze. I read it again. I couldn't recall ever seeing that verse before, but there it was. A proclamation so strange it felt like a contradiction, not justifying the penitent, not the one who improved, not the lawkeeper, but the ungodly. I sat in silence, my soul stirred, and then a question broke through. If God only justifies the good, why would He need the cross at all? That voice wasn't mine. It came from the one I thought had turned away from me. I didn't leap to my feet, didn't break into sobs, didn't have some grand transformation. I just sat there with a small beam of light creeping through the darkness. A light that didn't blaze, didn't shout, but was clear and alive. I began to wonder, if He truly justifies the ungodly, then maybe, just maybe, some small sliver of grace is still meant for me. I didn't believe it fully. I didn't step out right away, but I stopped running. And for a soul in free fall, even stopping is a miracle. Facing the cross. I didn't come to the cross with spectacular repentance. I came with trembling feet and a heart half believing, half doubting. I didn't come with powerful prayers. I came with a sigh. For the first time in many months, I opened the Bible, not to find justice, but to find hope. I didn't read to condemn myself, but to see if anyone like me had ever been found within its pages. And I did see a despised tax collector beating his chest and crying out, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." And I saw the reply, this man went home justified rather than the other. I saw the woman caught in adultery waiting for stones to strike her face, but instead she heard the words, "Neither do I condemn you." I saw Peter, who swore to follow Jesus to the death, yet denied Him 3 times, and afterward was called back with a gentle question, "Do you love me?" I no longer doubted the cross was never meant for those who've never fallen. It was made for those who know they can't get up unless someone lifts them. I looked at the cross, not for the first time, but for the first time I truly understood. It wasn't just the place where the innocent died for the guilty. It was the place where every reason to condemn me was nailed down forever. I used to think, if I change, He'll forgive. But now I see clearly He forgives, so that I can begin to change. Forgiveness isn't a reward, it's a beginning. The cross doesn't require me to bring anything, no reasoning, no merit, no promise of improvement, only this: to come. I had brought too much with me when I approached God: excuses, lists of good deeds, expectations, and fears. But now I brought only one thing: myself, bare, broken, with nothing left to hide. And there at the foot of the cross I heard these words, not with my ears but with my soul: I know you are unworthy. And I came for exactly that reason. Surrender. No more resistance. I had spent my whole life trying to prove something to God, that I wasn't as bad as others, that I could fix my own mistakes, that I was worthy of acceptance. But all of it led to one place: exhaustion. I had nothing left to hold in my hands, no resume, no spiritual reputation, no credibility, no role, no polished image. I had lost it all. And in that very loss, I began to see the light. I remember one night when I couldn't pray out loud, I simply whispered 4 words. I can't anymore. I didn't know if that was a prayer or a confession. But to God, perhaps the two aren't so different. I used to think surrender was failure, but in that moment I realized surrender was the only doorway into life. No more striving for perfection. No more trying to please God with performance. No more bargaining, no more hollow promises. Just collapse and let Him pick me up. I no longer said, I'll try not to fall again. Instead, I only said, if you don't hold me, I will fall again. I no longer said, I'll live well to make you proud. I only whispered, Kun, if you don't live in me, then I have nothing at all. It wasn't a bold faith. It was a broken faith. The faith of someone who had tried every road and had only one left. No more self-saving, no more self-proving, only belief. Belief that He doesn't need my strength, but waits for my surrender. Belief that the weakness I've been hiding is exactly what He will use. Belief that His love doesn't ask me to prove anything. Surrender isn't standing up and walking forward. It's lying down and trusting that He will lift you. And in that moment, I didn't see any grand miracle. No light from heaven, no booming voice, only a strange silence and a peace not of this world. That was the moment I knew. He had not abandoned me, and I no longer wanted to resist Him. Righteousness given, but not from within. I didn't feel different right away. I still carried memories of sin, still bore wounds, still lived with consequences that hadn't vanished. There were no trumpets sounding from heaven, no glory resting on my body, but something inside me had changed. Not because I became better, not because I overcame sin, not because I was clean, but because I was declared clean. The righteousness I received didn't come from anything I did. It came from the one who lived perfectly and died in my place. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be justified by faith. Not, He sees I'm trying, so He forgives me, but He sees I am completely powerless and declares me forgiven though I deserve nothing. I used to think God gave righteousness as a reward, but now I see He gives it like a robe to the naked, a position, not a performance, a declaration, not a compliment. This righteousness is not a feeling, not the sense that I'm improving, but a change in status before the eyes of God. I, a sinner, am now called righteous, not because I earned it, but because Jesus lived in my place and died in my place, and rose again to guarantee it. I remember the verse, He became sin for us so that through Him we might become the righteousness of God. It was not a fair exchange. It was a divine trade beyond reason. I gave Him my ruin and received back a righteousness He bled to give me. I no longer try to earn forgiveness. I live in the truth that I've already been forgiven, and that forgiveness changes everything. I no longer stand before God like a trembling beggar. I stand as a child, clothed in the robe of righteousness, not my righteousness, but the righteousness of the one who loved me enough to give Himself for me. Living again in the light, I used to think that to step into God's light, I had to prepare carefully. I had to cleanse my heart, prove I had changed, fix myself. I had to become a better person, but I didn't know. That light didn't require me to change before entering. It changed me as I stepped in. When I came to God, bare, weak, empty-handed, He didn't push me away. He embraced me, and that light began to pour into every broken part of me, no longer afraid of judgment, no longer running from truth. I began to live honestly. I began to love genuinely. I began to breathe again in my soul. I no longer live to prove I'm worthy. I live as one who has been forgiven, one given new life. Every good deed I do is no longer to make up for it. It's simply the overflow of gratitude. I no longer compare myself to others. No need to measure my spirituality against theirs. I know that I live because of grace, and without grace I am no different from anyone else. I no longer force myself to be strong. I can cry. I can be weak. I can confess failure without fear of rejection, because I know I wasn't saved by my own strength, and I won't stay saved by it either. I am held by everlasting love, a love that bled for me, a love that chose me and before I even knew how to choose what was right, a love that knows every sin I've ever committed and still calls me child. Now I don't live to climb some ladder to heaven. I live from the place of one already raised up, already pulled out of hell by the pierced hand of the Redeemer. I live not because I deserve to. I live because He lives in me. There is a verse in the Bible that, if you read it too quickly, you'll miss the very soul of the gospel. God justifies the ungodly. Sounds absurd, doesn't it? We're used to a world where the good are rewarded and the bad are cast out. We believe that only when we're good enough, moral enough, repentant enough, can we be accepted by God. But this verse shatters all of that. God doesn't declare righteous those who manage to improve themselves. He doesn't forgive those who prove they're truly sorry. He justifies the ungodly, and meaning the completely undeserving. So what does this mean? Righteousness, is not a reward, but a gift. When God declares someone righteous, He's not saying that person has become a saint. He's saying, I see you, but I will view you through the substitute. Righteousness is not a warm feeling inside your heart. It is a legal declaration from God over someone who should be condemned. You don't need to measure up. You need to stand in the right place. In Christ Jesus, grace begins on when merit ends. We're used to exchanges. I do something for God, then God does something for me. But the gospel is not a negotiation. The gospel is for the one who does nothing but believes. If you're still striving to be forgiven, stop. God doesn't need your effort to forgive you. He needs your faith to be placed in the right person. Sin has been dealt with, but not on you. Some will ask, but what about God's justice? Doesn't He have to punish sin? Exactly. He didn't overlook sin. He judged it in the most righteous way by placing it on His Son. Every sin you were supposed to carry was transferred onto Jesus' body, and every bit of His righteousness was placed on you. It is a divine exchange, unfair, undeserved, but completely true. And that's why the gospel is not an invitation. It is a declaration. The gospel doesn't say, try harder and then God will save. It says, God has already done everything necessary. The question is, do you believe? If today you feel not moral enough, not strong enough, not godly enough, then congratulations. You're exactly where grace is ready to do its work. If you're waiting until you're better to come to God, then maybe you'll never come at all. Because salvation isn't for good people. Salvation is for those who know they can't be good enough. You don't need to clean yourself up before entering the house of God. You just need the courage to walk in, broken, and let Him do what you cannot. He doesn't need empty promises. He doesn't need one more false start. He needs a soul brave enough to say, "I have nothing, please save me." Jesus didn't come to coach you into a better version of yourself. He came to put your old self to death and raise up a brand new creation. And if today you're feeling hopeless, if you feel unworthy, if you believe you've gone too far, then know this: you are the one He came for. If you've made it this far, something in you is likely stirring. Maybe it's a pain without a name, a fear of being rejected, a longing to be touched by a love that asks for nothing in return. And if you're asking, could there still be grace left for someone like me? Then the answer was nailed to a cross over 2,000 years ago. Yes, for you. Let this video be more than just a story you heard. Let it be an invitation you respond to. Leave a comment. It doesn't have to sound spiritual, just be honest. You can simply write, "I need you," or share your story, because maybe your honest word will be the key that unlocks hope for someone on the edge. Don't forget to subscribe, not to boost numbers, but so you never miss those quiet reminders that you are still loved. There is still a way back, and there's still one waiting for you to return. There is still a way back, and there's still one waiting for you to return. Share this video with someone who's tired, not to preach, but just to gently say, you don't have to keep holding it together. You don't have to be perfect to start again. You just need the courage to say, "I can't do this anymore, please save me." And that might be the most powerful prayer you've ever spoken. If today you're carrying the weight of regret, the weight of things you can't undo, then pause and look up. Because in the midst of 1,000 voices inside your heart, there's still a gentle whisper echoing from the cross. I know it all, and I still chose you.
He was given a ring to rule the darkness. The ring was never a trophy, it was a test. He recorded their names, their secrets, their power. He commanded spirits, and they obeyed. It wasn't a demon, it was a woman. He stood where storms began. Worn by time, crowned in silence.
Welcome to Prayer Station. There once was a man called the wisest in human history. A king revered by nations. The one who built the temple of the Lord, crafted in pure gold, precious stones, and a glory the world had never seen. But that very man listened more to the voices of unclean spirits than to the word from heaven. He recorded their confessions, documenting names, weaknesses, powers, and traits of each fallen being. His name was Solomon. And there exists a book hidden from most Bibles because it's too dangerous. The Testament of Solomon, the confession of a man who once walked in supreme spiritual authority and lost his soul in the process. We often think demons only target the weak, but the truth is, they lurk around those who are most influential, most anointed, most used by God. Because when a leader falls, an entire generation can fall with him. And that was Solomon's tragedy. He didn't fall because of war. He wasn't overthrown by enemies. He didn't die in rebellion. He fell because of the very spiritual forces he thought he had mastered. In this forbidden testament, Solomon describes receiving a ring from an angel. a ring with power to command spirits. He used it to bind demons, to build the temple, to organize the spiritual realm. But the deeper he went, the more he was entangled by what he thought was just a tool, and became the victim of the very forces he once ruled. So if you're seeking spiritual power, if you think you can control the darkness, be careful. Because sometimes what you hold in your hand is the very thing that will bind your soul in silence. No one knows exactly when it happened. All we know is that one day during a moment of prayer, the archangel Michael appeared to Solomon. The young king, still in the golden years of his reign, filled with passion to build the temple for the Lord, was given a ring inscribed with the sacred name. This ring, according to ancient accounts, held a power beyond human comprehension. It could command demonic spirits, forcing them to obey and act at the will of the one who bore it. It was not an ornament, not a symbol of royalty. It was a sacred commission, a divine permission. God once used Moses' staff to split the sea, used Joshua's trumpet to collapse a city. Now he placed a ring on Solomon's hand to subdue the darkness. Solomon didn't use it for amusement or to flaunt authority. He used it to command spirits to build the temple, a structure too sacred to be constructed by mere human hands. To Solomon, it wasn't magic, it was part of God's divine plan. Everything seemed to begin well. The spirits were bound, precious stones were delivered, the divine architecture began to rise. But within Solomon, a question began to whisper. Why would God give me this power? Is it because I am holy enough to control the darkness? Or because he wants me to face something no one else could bear? The ring gave no answer. It only shimmered in the sunlight, turning silently according to the will of its wearer. Solomon didn't realize that the ring was not just a gift. It was a test, a light that would shine in on the deepest parts of his soul. And in the silence of the angel, the warning was never heard. Solomon believed he could control the darkness by invoking the name of the Lord. But from the very beginning, he had already let it come closer than he ever imagined. And then, he began calling out each spirit by name. Solomon began calling each spirit by name, not through magic, but through the divine authority of the ring. One by one they appeared, writhing, screaming, resisting. Yet eventually each one bowed in submission. They did not merely manifest. They were forced to speak truth. Their names, their functions, the torment they bring upon humankind, their weaknesses, and their true essence. This was not an exorcism, it was a metaphysical tribunal. Solomon was no longer just a king. He had become an interrogator of the unseen. Each dark entity, each being from the shadows, was summoned to stand before him and confess secrets never before revealed. Some ruled over wrath, others inflicted madness, some tore marriages apart. There were spirits with grotesque forms, lion-headed, serpent-bodied, with wings of birds, each one a reflection of some hidden domain within the human soul. Solomon recorded everything, meticulously, deliberately. It was as if his purpose was no longer just to bind them, but to understand how darkness works. And here, something fragile began to emerge. When you dwell too deeply in the study of darkness, you begin to sense it more vividly than the light. He began asking more questions than he prayed. He pored over the demon's words, analyzing, pondering, as if hidden truths lay buried within their confessions. Truths even Scripture had not disclosed. No one knows whether he wrote them to warn future generations or to preserve them. But those records became the testament of Solomon, a forbidden document cast out of canon because it contained too much shadow, even if veiled in the pursuit of wisdom. Solomon assigned each spirit a code, a role in the spiritual structure of the world. And when you revisit that list today, you don't just see the nature of demons. You see the nature of humanity. For everything they brought, wrath, lust, greed, pride, sorrow, still dwells in us, every single day. Solomon believed he was ruling over the darkness, but what he didn't see was that the darkness was also watching him. And then came the lesson no one had ever taught him. How do you keep a soul holy when every single day you stand face to face with the 72 deepest temptations of mankind? The more Solomon used the ring, the more skillful he became. He no longer trembled when summoning a spirit. He no longer doubted when they spoke. He no longer flinched in the face of evil. Instead, there was the calm of one in control, and the quiet satisfaction of power resting in his hands. The ring never resisted. It obeyed his every command. But because of that very ease, Solomon slowly forgot one crucial truth. The power did not come from him. The ability to subdue demons did not make him righteous. It was merely a temporary gift, granted to fulfill the will of God. And without obedience, even the one holding power would be exposed by that very power. Yet within Solomon, another hunger began to grow. The satisfaction of knowing more than anyone else. To know spirits no one else had heard of. To know how to bind them. To know how to command them for his own purposes. He no longer used the ring solely to build the temple. He used it to study the darkness, to access spiritual secrets beyond what God had revealed. And in that process, his heart moved, no longer centered on the temple, but now drifting toward a far more dangerous place, the thin line between wisdom and pride. Solomon began to believe, if God has given me this authority, then surely I can use it to unlock even what he has not revealed. But that belief was the beginning of his fall. Because true revelation always flows from surrender, while knowledge without reverence only hardens the soul and leads it quietly into the dark. Solomon held a key in his hand, but he forgot. Not every door is meant to be opened, and soon one such door would open, not from the darkness, but from the seduction called love. There was no warning thunder. No angel appeared to stop him. Everything unfolded in silence. Solomon was still king. The temple was still being built. The people still listened to his teachings. Everything continued, as if nothing had changed. But within his soul, a small crack had formed, and it was quietly widening. That was when Solomon began to ask questions, not of God, but of himself. If I can do all these things, what is there that I cannot know? Knowledge became a spiritual addiction. Solomon didn't deny God. He simply set him aside to pursue something newer, deeper, higher. He studied the dark entities like a scholar dissects biology. No more fear, no more prayers for protection, only a pure craving for control, to know everything. And in doing so, obedience was left behind. Not by open rebellion, but by misplaced priorities. What was once most holy became just one part of his spiritual exploration list. The fracture of the soul didn't come with a strike. It came with prolonged neglect. Day by day, he stopped waiting for guidance. He stopped asking before acting. He no longer trembled before the presence. He became familiar with power and foreign to surrender. But power is never a guarantee of spiritual health. And when obedience fades, power becomes a double-edged sword, severing the connection between man and heaven. Solomon still wore the ring, but he was beginning to lose himself. And then a woman entered, not to steal his power, but to widen a crack that had long been smoldering in his soul. She was no threat, no enemy, no sword-bearer. She came clothed in beauty, in kindness, in intelligence. A foreign woman from the East, not one who brought war to the kingdom, but who brought admiration to the heart of the king. Solomon had faced demonic spirits. He had defeated them, bound them, forced them to confess and serve him. But he did not know how to withstand one thing: seduction. This woman did not force Solomon to do anything wrong. She didn't ask him to abandon the temple. She simply asked for a small corner, a space to worship her God, just a small altar. Outside the palace, nothing that would offend the God of Solomon. And Solomon agreed. It was an open betrayal, just a small compromise, a bit of kindness, a soft concession. But in the spiritual realm, a little is enough to open the door. He still preached, still led the people, still wore the ring. But his heart had tilted, and a divided heart cannot clearly hear heaven's voice. From allowing the altar, he began attending the pagan rituals, not because he rejected God, but because he didn't want to hurt the one he loved. Fleshly love overcame holy fear, and this was how the darkness defeated a mighty man, not with war, but with emotion. Desire replaced obedience. Beauty replaced holiness. Affection drowned out the voice of God. Solomon, the man who once made spirits bow, now bowed before a gentle form, carrying compromise. And from that moment, he began to build altars for the very forces he once bound. No one saw this coming. The man who once cast out demons from others was now standing before the altars of those very spirits, burning incense, offering sacrifices, and calling upon their names. Not because he was forced, not because he didn't know better, but because his heart had grown weary of holding the line. At first, he made a clear distinction. He kept God's worship separate from the pagan rituals. But like every subtle fall, the boundaries began to blur. Once, then twice, then it became a habit. Until one day he could no longer tell the difference between the temple of the Lord and the altars of false gods. Solomon once had the ring. He once had divine wisdom. He had seen the Lord twice with his own eyes, but now he knelt before carved idols, murmuring incantations in strange tongues. His soul was not traded for power, but diluted through compromise. And that's the most dangerous thing, when holiness is watered down by something that still looks spiritual. Solomon didn't lose his throne. He didn't lose the people's respect. But he lost communion with heaven. Something no one could see with their eyes, but the greatest loss a human could ever know. The people still called him king. They still studied his wisdom. But God was silent. And when God is silent, all that remains are echoes of past glory. Solomon thought he was still in control, but he didn't realize. When you begin to serve what you once preached against, you no longer own your soul. From one who bound demons, he became one who bowed before them. From the builder of the temple, he became the builder of altars for false gods. And the Lord, who once spoke so clearly, began to speak only through silence. There was no thunder from the skies, no prophet stormed in with fire, no lightning fell from heaven. There was only silence. And for a man who had once heard the voice of the Lord, that silence was the most terrifying judgment of all. Solomon still had his throne, he still had his wealth, the people still praised his wisdom. He still stood within the temple he had built with his own hands. But deep inside, he knew God was no longer there as he once had been. Scripture says the Lord declared, "Because of this, I will tear the kingdom from your hands." But strangely, this didn't happen in Solomon's lifetime. It happened to his son. Why? Because God does not judge on man's timetable. He does not tear down kingdoms the moment we expect him to. He withdraws his presence first. He lets things continue, but without the breath of life. This is a subtle judgment. He lets you keep going, but without his spirit. He lets you preach, lead, and serve, but on foundations that are already fractured. Solomon may have thought, if God hasn't punished me yet, perhaps he has overlooked it. But he didn't realize that God's patience was a final invitation to repentance, not a sign of approval. And when the heart no longer repents, that patience becomes evidence of guilt. For God waited, but man never returned. The holy presence no longer dwelled in the depths of Solomon's soul. And what is more terrifying than punishment is the absence of the one who gave life its meaning. The outward rituals may still remain, but the spirit had departed. You might still be doing all the right things, but no longer in the place where God has called you to be. And when God withdraws his hand, everything Solomon once wrote becomes only the memory of a soul that once walked with him. When people read the testament of Solomon, many are drawn to the names of the demons. Others are intrigued by the spiritual structure Solomon describes. Some treat it as a map of the spiritual realm. Some study it to learn how to command dark forces. But few ever ask, how could a man who was once so close to God drift so deep into darkness without even realizing it? The Testament of Solomon is not just a record. It is the residue of a soul that once burned brightly, but became lost. Each line written doesn't just contain the names of fallen spirits, but the fingerprints of a man who believed he was still serving God, even as he lost himself in the process. Solomon does not write as a victor, not as a cold scholar, but as someone clinging to what he once accomplished, knowing deep down he was no longer the same. Like a lamp that once shone with fire, now hollow, retelling stories of its light in hopes of convincing itself that it still burns. The document he left behind is full of details, knowledge, power, but it lacks one thing: the breath of spiritual life. And that is the lesson for each of us. You may be familiar with the darkness. You may know the spiritual laws. You may understand how power works. But if your heart is not anchored to God every single day, you too may become a living testament. Brilliant in form, but empty within. Perhaps Solomon wrote these words to warn future generations. Or maybe he just wanted to leave something behind before the final light within him faded completely. And in that voice, an echo reaches our generation. Are you recording darkness instead of living in the light? Solomon is long gone. The temple he built has crumbled into dust, and the ring, whether real or not, has fallen into the silence of history. But his spirit still lives on. It lives in those today who operate in the name of God, yet no longer tremble before his holy presence. There are those in the modern church who wear invisible rings: power, influence, titles, fame, views, VIP seats. They preach, they heal, they prophesy, they host massive gatherings. But if you listen closely, you no longer hear the voice of God in their voices. They once started well like Solomon. They were once called like Solomon. They were once used mightily like Solomon. But also like him, they let their hearts drift just a little and never found the way back. They are obsessed with church systems. They chase spiritual victories. They study demons, warfare, and impartation. But they no longer read the Bible to seek him, only to strengthen their own image. So they preach about light, while living in the twilight between light and shadow. The most heartbreaking part isn't that they don't know, it's that they once knew so deeply. And that is what the Testament of Solomon reveals. A man once closest to God can become the most estranged from his presence. We are not immune. No one is too anointed to fall. And if you do not remain in humility, the ring you wear may silently tighten around your soul. Today, God is not looking for those who control the spirit realm. He is looking for those who tremble, who surrender, who never forget that they are just dust. And if you can still hear his voice today, be warned before the ring becomes your chain. Solomon is gone. His kingdom was torn in two. The temple was defiled. History closed a chapter filled with glory and tragedy. But the story didn't truly end, because the ring, the symbol of spiritual authority entrusted by God, still changes hands. Today, it's no longer a physical band of gold. It could be a preacher's microphone, a Christian influencer's follower count, a VIP badge to a spiritual conference. The admiration, reverence, and weight a voice carries in a community. The ring is still being handed out. God still gives gifts. He still calls people to public platforms. He still uses human vessels to reveal his power. But the question is not, are you anointed? It's, is your heart still surrendered? You may perform miracles, prophesy, preach powerfully. But if you're not living in daily obedience, that power will burn your soul from within. Not everyone with a calling falls, but everyone with a calling is vulnerable. If they do not examine themselves before the one who gave them the ring, maybe today that ring is already in your hand. Or maybe it's sitting before you, waiting for you to reach out. The real question is not, are you strong enough to wield it? But rather, are you humble enough to remove it when God says to? Because the ring can be used to build the temple. But that very same ring that can also unlock the gates of darkness if your heart no longer belongs to the light. You don't fall because of lack of power, you fall because of lack of surrender. The story of Solomon is not just a historical event, it's a mirror, exposing uncomfortable truths about our own spiritual lives. Solomon didn't fall because of obvious sin. He didn't renounce God. He didn't destroy the temple. He didn't openly reject God's word. He just let his heart drift slightly, just one extra altar, one small compromise, one idea that said, I can still do what's right and add a little something else. And that was where the collapse began. The greatest danger isn't the devil knocking at your door. It's when his voice whispers in your heart, you're fine. Keep going. You're still in ministry, still preaching with fire. People still cry during your services. You still get shares, views, and human recognition. But maybe God has gone silent. The question is no longer, what am I doing for God? But am I still living before him with a trembling heart? You may be thriving in spiritual success, but examine yourself. Are there things you know are wrong, but have learned to ignore just to maintain the calling? Do you still tremble in his presence? Or are you now only leading others into it, while you stand outside? Solomon is a warning to anyone who has ever been mightily used by God. Because the ones who are entrusted with much are often the ones who fall hardest if they fail to guard their hearts. The ring didn't kill him, nor did the demons. It was the quiet compromises, the silence toward darkness, the blending of the sacred and the profane, that slowly eroded his soul. Don't let obedience become the price you pay for influence. Let influence die if it no longer brings you closer to God. You can build the temple with power, but if you don't guard your heart, you yourself will raise altars to the darkness. Solomon didn't lose a war. He wasn't dethroned. He wasn't killed. He wasn't exiled. He simply lost himself in silence. And that is exactly what's happening to many servants of God today. They haven't renounced God. They haven't publicly walked away from the faith. But day by day, they trade his presence for influence. They abandon reverence to gain power. They step on the pulpit with sharpness of speech, but with hearts that have grown numb. God doesn't need you to subdue demonic spirits. He can send angels for that. He needs you to keep your heart pure before him. If you're holding an invisible ring today, a calling, a ministry, influence, spiritual power, ask yourself, am I using it to build the temple? Or am I slowly raising altars to idols I no longer dare to name? Obedience may seem weak, but it is the only fortress strong enough to protect your soul from being manipulated. Because no one stands firm by anointing alone if their heart is no longer surrendered. Don't let Solomon's story remain just history. Let it be a warning, a wake-up call, a surgical strike against pride in anyone who carries spiritual power. If this video stirred something deep inside you, not emotion, not fear, but a familiar whisper from the one you once walked closely with, more closely than now, then this is not a coincidence. It is a calling. You don't need to wait until you've lost everything to return. You just need the courage to step away from compromise. Bow your head, be honest, and say to God, I don't want power if it takes me away from you. Give me again a heart that trembles and repents. I don't want to be just used, I want to belong. And if you're holding a ring today, power, influence, ministry, recognition, ask yourself, am I using this to build a temple or to erect an altar to myself? But don't stop here. If what you just heard awakens something deep within you, share this video with someone standing where you once stood. Maybe they too need to take off their ring before it's too late. Subscribe to this channel if you need more wake-up calls like this. This isn't a place for entertainment. It's a place where your soul is reminded, shaken, and led back to the light. Because sometimes a video isn't just content. It's an invitation to return to where you once belonged. They were once angels. They once stood closer to the light than any other being in the universe. But today, they are kings of hell. 72 spirits, 72 entities once summoned, confronted and sealed by Solomon with the very ring gifted from heaven. Very few know that the Bible never clearly names the spirits that were sealed. But in forgotten manuscripts, In texts labeled as ancient occult, the name Goetia appears, carrying the full list of entities that once sowed darkness across the earth. Welcome to Prayer Station. Some call them demons, others call them symbols. But Solomon did not. He didn't analyze, he acted. He didn't research, he sealed. And he was never prideful, for he knew. Once pride opens its mouth, hell finds its door. But centuries after his death, something terrible happened. The ring vanished, and mankind, in one way or another, reopened the gate Solomon once sealed with both wisdom and tears. The question is, are you sure you know who you're calling? And when you look at names like Baal, Hyman, Astaroth, and treat them like a game. It all began with a simple request. In his dream, Solomon did not ask for gold or a mighty army. He only asked for wisdom to govern the people of God. But what he didn't expect was, when he asked for wisdom, he unknowingly asked for the responsibility to carry a battle the previous generation couldn't finish. According to ancient texts and extra-biblical writings, God did not only grant him wisdom, he gave him a ring. Not a piece of jewelry, but a divine seal engraved with the holy name and the symbol of heavenly authority. With that ring, Solomon could not only rule over men, but command the spiritual realms, including beings once cast out of heaven. People call it the Ring of Solomon, a symbolic object. But in the depths of Jewish mysticism and ancient Goetia manuscripts, it's not just a symbol. It is a seal, a divine judgment upon beings that belong neither in heaven nor on earth. That ring didn't seem dangerous until you understood what it could summon. Solomon quickly realized he wasn't just given wisdom. He was called to a mission no other king had dared to undertake, to confront, name, and seal away the rebellious spirits spreading chaos across the world. But because he knew that if no one did it, the world would become one giant altar for hell. And so he began the journey, naming each spirit one by one and closing one by one the gates the world never dared to look straight into. But this journey did not begin with a list of names. It began with the crack between light and darkness, widening before the king's very eyes. Solomon's time wasn't just a time of peace. It was also an era of an invisible crisis, a disturbance that even the priests in the temple could not explain. Plague spread without cause. People dreamed the same strange dreams. Children were born with eyes that seemed to have seen too much. And in broad daylight, shadows began to appear, shadows that did not belong to this dimension. With the ring in his hand, Solomon gradually realized this wasn't some anomaly. This was a crack, a fracture in the veil separating two worlds, the world of men and the world the Bible only described with one word: Sheol, the abyss. According to apocryphal texts in the Goetia manuscripts, that was when the rebellious spirits banished from heaven began finding their way back by slipping through the hearts of men, not in physical form, but through dreams, through whispers in the night, through seductive, prideful thoughts, through things that made people believe they were discovering their own inner depths, when in truth they were being lured into strange territory. And that was when Solomon knew he could wait no longer. If he didn't act, the crack would become a gate. And if the gate opened, it wouldn't be just one spirit that escaped. All 72 Goetia spirits, each carrying a unique form of destructive power, would pour into the world, cloaked in the forms of knowledge, art, religion, and counterfeit salvation. He began to pray. not with ordinary words, but with the urgency of a man who knew he was about to call out the names of ancient spirits, entities that even prophets had never confronted directly. And when he raised the ring, spoke the holy name, and sealed the ritual circles, the crack began to glow. That glow didn't come from heaven. It was hell reacting to being summoned properly. And then the first spirit appeared, not with a distinct form, but with the scent of ashes, the sound of both laughter and weeping, and the torment of one who once knew the light, but chose the darkness. That was the moment it began, when Solomon realized each spirit wasn't just a demon, but a forgotten chapter of history, a fragment of fallen memories from ancient angels. And he knew the next conversation would not simply be an expulsion, but a judgment. Solomon did not shout. He simply asked, "Who are you?" And Baal, for the first time after centuries of freedom, was forced to answer, "I am the king of the East. I command 66 legions. I make people vanish in the night, and I cannot be seen unless I will it." Then came the others. Agares, riding a crocodile, hawk in hand. Vasago, with eyes that could see the past and future. Gamagan, whose voice sounded like horses weeping from the pit. Marbus, lion-headed, bearing knowledge of medicine and disease. One by one they appeared, and one by one they were forced to declare their names, powers, ranks, and origins, like a divine interrogation before heaven's court. Solomon asked nothing from them. He did not bargain. He did not seek dominion. He only needed to know who ruled what, and how to restore the shattered order. And strangely, though born of darkness, the spirits had no choice but to obey the eternal law. When the ring was raised with the holy name, they could not lie. It wasn't magic that bound the first spirits. It was a man who knew he was small, yet stood in the authority of the Almighty. And from that moment on, the battle between truth and darkness ceased to be legend. It became chronicle. When the first spirit appeared, no one, not even Solomon, could have expected its form to be split into three. One human head, one cat's head, one toad's head. All three moved, all three spoke, each with a different voice, each a different layer of consciousness, as if representing three fractured identities of one being torn apart from within. It was Baal, once worshipped as a god, praised by ancient Eastern nations and in many traditions confused with or intentionally merged with Beelzebub or Belzebul, the Lord of the Flies, or in another translation, the Lord of the Sky. Baal's appearance wasn't just a manifestation, it was a challenge. No roaring, no fire, no threats, just a quiet presence, almost smug. A spirit once celebrated by mankind, once offered thousands of sacrifices, now standing before the bearer of the ring that could seal all that power and smiling. "You called me, but do you dare to seal the faith of your ancestors?" Baal said. Solomon didn't answer. He wasn't fooled by appearance or words. He didn't come to debate. He came with authority. When he raised the ring, Baal's sigil lit up, a labyrinthine symbol etched into the air, and with a declaration in the holy name, he sealed the first spirit. But something unseen happened. When Baal was sealed, he left behind a trail of sound, like a whisper stretched across time, unclear yet repeating in Solomon's mind. It wasn't a curse. It was the haunting echo of an age when mankind admired the darkness and called it light. And that was just the first. After Baal came Agares, an old man riding a crocodile carrying a falcon able to make people freeze mid-flight. Then Vasago, the gentle spirit who reveals lost things. Then Gamigan, a knight with a voice like horses crying in hell. Then Marbus, who could both cause and heal disease, reshape the human form and control ancient knowledge of biology and medicine. Solomon slowly realized these were not demons in the traditional sense. These were entities of knowledge, once participants in the divine, now twisting that same knowledge to derail humanity. They didn't kill with blades. They made people love the wrong things, learn the wrong things, believe the wrong things, and walk the wrong path. And each time he summoned a new spirit, the weight on his soul grew heavier. Not from fear, but from knowing that he wasn't just sealing powers, he was closing a gate mankind seemed too eager to reopen. But Solomon realized something deeper. Sealing power is one thing, but sealing man's desire for that power is something else entirely. And he knew the spirits to come wouldn't just test his authority, they would strike at the very core of his faith. Sealing a spirit is not like imprisoning a criminal. It is not simply about subduing. It is a spiritual event, where authority cannot rely solely on power but must come from alliance with the one who created those spirits. The ring that Solomon wore carried the power to summon, command, and bind. But Solomon quickly realized, if he relied only on the ring, he would be fighting alone. Alone against beings that were once angels. Alone against entities that knew the mechanics of light but chose to wield it to craft darkness. Alone was not enough. So Solomon established a covenant. He did not act like a sorcerer. He did not manipulate spirits for personal gain. He sealed them in the name of the Holy One. Each ritual was not a magical performance but an act of worship. A moment where he stood on the side of light against those who had fallen from glory. Every time he called the name of a spirit, he would pronounce its title, and then invoke a greater name, a holy name, to compel it to bow. Not because the ring had intrinsic power, but because Solomon willingly became an agent of righteousness. That's what terrified the spirits, not his might, but that he had no desire to be a master, only a servant. In one ancient manuscript, there is a recorded exchange between Solomon and one of the most powerful spirits, believed to be Beleth, a king of wrath who demanded music to be played before he would appear. You have the ring, but do you have the commitment? For if all you seek is control, then sooner or later you will become one of us. Solomon did not answer. He simply pressed the ring into the ground, redrew the seal with blood, and declared, "In the name of the one who created heaven, earth, and all spirits, I summon not to control, but to close the path you once strayed upon." And with that, Beleth, along with his music, and was swallowed into a vessel, not bound by physical force, but by the sanctity of the calling Solomon carried. From that moment on, his rituals changed. No longer merely seals, they became renewals of covenant between man and the divine. Because if one man holds true to faithfulness, even hell must kneel. But it was in that moment that Solomon realized something even greater. The ring may seal spirits, but only covenant can seal his own heart. And the trials ahead would not just be encounters with demons, but with the trembling of his own faith. If the first spirits were beings of primal power, then in the deeper levels, Solomon began to encounter spirits who had once stood near the very throne of God. Not mere demons, but fallen angels. Creatures who once bore the light but chose to turn their backs on it. And this was the hardest part, because these spirits did not appear in grotesque forms. They came with majesty, with beauty, with eloquence, with deep knowledge, with reasoning that felt profoundly convincing. They did not scream. They persuaded. They did not seek destruction. They invited collaboration. One of them was Paimon, a radiant king riding a camel accompanied by sacred music appearing like an ancient university master. He could teach every discipline, explain every philosophy, analyze the workings of the world, and make you believe he only wanted to help. But what Solomon heard was not knowledge. It was pride, veiled in wisdom. When he said, "If you learn from me, you will become like the gods," Solomon realized he was no longer facing a mere spirit. He was facing the original temptation from Eden. Then came Asmodeus, the spirit of passion, jealousy, and destruction. He didn't pretend. He appeared with 3 heads, human, bull, and ram, seated on a dragon of fire, exhaling breaths that scorched innocence. Solomon wrote in one manuscript, "The air in the room felt suffocating, not from fear, but from desire made flesh." This was no longer a battle of power. It was a test of discernment. Solomon had to constantly ask himself, am I confronting truth or a layer of counterfeit light? Because those who once stood nearest the light are the ones who know how to disguise darkness in light best. Sealing these spirits was not merely summoning, it was confronting the fragile parts of his own soul. A little compromise, a little cooperation, a little pride, and the ring would lose its power. Solomon would not just lose his authority, he would lose his soul. That's why he never allowed himself to stand alone. He constantly invoked the holy name, constantly purified his rituals, fasted, prayed, and rebuilt the fear of God amidst an empire seduced by success. Because he knew, the deeper he went into the Goetia, the fewer spirits resisted. They didn't want to fight. They wanted to convince him there's no need to seal us. We can work together. And that is the most dangerous trap of all. When darkness stops resisting and starts being sweet. At that moment, the one who holds the ring no longer needs courage, but must be more discerning than the angels themselves. Legend says that after sealing the final spirit, Solomon did not celebrate. There was no feast, no ceremony of honor, not even a single declaration. I have completed a great work. Instead, he quietly placed the ring in a secret place and never wore it again. Why? Because the ring, throughout the entire journey, was not merely a sacred tool. It was a burden. Each time Solomon raised his hand to summon a spirit, he was not only calling it out of the darkness, he was awakening something shadowed within himself. The ring, by its very nature, was not just a key of sealing. It connected the spiritual realm to its bearer. It demanded absolute purity, true reverence, and unwavering faith. Any misalignment within the soul, even the smallest, pride, compromise, curiosity, could become a door swung wide in reverse. Some apocryphal texts recorded this warning. The ring does not merely issue commands, it listens to the heart of the one who wears it. If that heart begins to hunger for power, it ceases to be an instrument of light. It becomes a bridge by which all of hell may enter the soul of its bearer. This is why, after Solomon, no one dared use it again, not because they lacked power, but because they lacked purity. Generations afterwards searched for the ring. Some ancient kings, alchemists, and occult practitioners claimed they had seen traces of it. Replicas were crafted, imitations forged. But no one could activate the true ring because no one had the covenant Solomon once held. Some say the ring was destroyed. Others believe it lies buried in a cave in Babylon. But there's a more mysterious tradition still, that the ring never disappeared. It merely sleeps, awaiting another who would dare enter into the same covenant as Solomon. Not for fame, not for power, not to control, but to close the gate the world keeps trying to reopen. Until that day, the ring remains still, and the world continues to tremble at the names long forgotten. Time passed. Solomon died. The kingdom split in two. The temple was destroyed, and over the years the stories of the ring became legend, while the list of sealed spirits turned into whispers in the dark. At first it was mere curiosity. Greek scholars, Babylonian seers, Egyptian mystics began passing down ancient manuscripts. Many of them believed to be alternate versions of Solomon's own writings. The names of spirits like Baal, Paimon, Asmodeus were no longer curses, but subjects of study. Then came the Middle Ages, when darkness and religion intertwined, and the Goetia manuscripts were revised, edited, systematized. The Lesser Key of Solomon was born, not as a warning but as an instruction manual for summoning. The world had shifted from sealing to summoning. Spirits were no longer seen as threats to avoid, but as tools to obtain what the flesh desired: wealth, fame, love, health, power. Even at the cost of one's soul, they drew summoning circles, etched sigils, painted magical triangles, chanted the names of spirits. And slowly what Solomon had once locked away began to crack open. Not everyone succeeded, but one success was enough to unleash widespread chaos. Invisible guests began to dwell in minds. Strange dreams emerged. Brilliant lives burst forth, then burned out in shame. Geniuses died young. Alchemists vanished without a trace. Some claimed they heard whispers when touching ancient texts. None of it was random. All of it stemmed from one ancient thirst. Humanity longs to command the sacred, but refuses to submit to the sacred one. And then, at an unknown point in history, someone found the vessel of sealing and broke it. According to a Mesopotamian legend, when Babylonians dug beneath a lake in search of Solomon's ancient treasure jar, they found no gold, only smoke rising from the fractured clay. And from that day on, the land never knew peace again. No one knows the full truth, but the list of the 72 Goetia spirits no longer slumbers in ink and parchment. They have emerged, not in form, but in influence. They may appear as a desire, an idea, a vision cloaked in enlightenment, but rooted in destruction. And the most terrifying part is this: today many call their names, without knowing who or what they're calling. And as was once warned, all it takes is one voice to bring down a kingdom. Not because the spirit is strong, but because the human heart is too easily swayed. When ancient manuscripts were examined more closely, scholars discovered something unsettling. The 72 Goetia spirits were not a random collection of fallen entities. They were organized, structured, ruled. These spirits were not a chaotic mob. They were a military force, ranked and titled with precise classifications: kings, princes, presidents, dukes, marquises, counts, knights. Each title denoted not just honor but authority, and the number of legions under their command. For example, Baal, the first spirit, Uneuts, was called the King of the East, commanding 66 legions. Paimon, among the most powerful, had 200 legions. Spirits like Asmodeus, Balaam, and Belith were not only regional rulers but also false prophets wielding intellect to deceive faith itself. But what shook scholars the most was this. All 72 spirits bowed under the dominion of 4 greater infernal kings, the dark pillars of hell's governance. They were Amaman, king of the east, the embodiment of deception dressed in light; Corson, king of the west, the essence of compromise and counterfeit glory; Ziminiar, king of the north, cold, strategic, a manipulator of religious order; Gop, king of the south, the master of hidden desires and emotional control. According to many traditions, these 4 were not separate entities but 4 manifestations of a singular will. Lucifer himself. 4 directions, 4 faces, 1 fall, 1 agenda. They did not need to appear. They did not need to be summoned. Their dominion was felt through the workings of the spirits beneath them, drawing mankind ever farther from the source of light. And this is what Solomon realized too late. While he sealed spirit after spirit, he was only locking away links in a chain. But the central will could not be sealed unless heaven itself intervened. In today's world, those who invoke lower spirits may think they're merely studying mysticism or exploring ancient knowledge. But in truth, they are opening doors for the ruling powers of darkness to re-establish their dominion. Not over lands, but over the hearts of humanity. A dominion masked as science, disguised as art, shrouded in philosophy, dressed in religion, but always leading to the same end: the worship of self and the rejection of God. And that is the true horror. They do not need to destroy with violence. They only need to convince us that we no longer need God to become like God. People often assume that all knowledge, if it holds academic value, will eventually be made public. But with Goetia, that is not the case. Many ancient manuscripts, especially those detailing the 72 spirits and summoning ritual, were redacted, censored, or vanished entirely from church libraries starting in the 13th century. Not because they were too mythical, but because they were too real. Some medieval records state, "There are things that should not be made public, for knowledge without spiritual discernment becomes a curse." Goetia, originally meaning the art of summoning spirits, was once studied by early Jewish, Christian, and Islamic scholars. But when the Orthodox Church gained influence, a purge of spiritual knowledge occurred. They preserved the Bible. They kept the Word of God. But they sealed away writings that could reopen doors to the darkness. Why? Because they knew a terrifying truth. Some keys still exist, not made of metal but of words, symbols, and rituals. And if placed in the wrong hands, they would not only break the gates of hell, they would unlock doorways within the soul of the reader. Many copies of the Lemegeton, also known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, were altered during the 17th century. Diagrams were removed. The order of spirits was shuffled. The details of sealing rituals, and especially the sacred name Solomon used to bind each entity, were lost or obscured. Some say the Vatican holds the original. Others claim the Freemasons, the Illuminati, or ancient esoteric orders preserved them as tools of influence and control. But regardless of who holds them, the truth is this: they have never been fully released to the public. The Church's silence on Goetia is not mere avoidance, it is a protective strategy. Because they understood, all it takes is one generation driven by pride and curiosity for summoning to become a trend instead of a taboo. And that is exactly what we are seeing today. Goetia is no longer hidden. It is openly shared in books, movies, YouTube videos, even in fashion and video games. No one is afraid anymore, but that is the true danger. When fear disappears, when the human soul is already too close to the threshold of a seal once broken. After everything, one question still remains. If Solomon was the one whom God entrusted with the authority to seal the most powerful spirits that ever existed, then why are they still active? Why do people still feel their influence, still hear whispers, still fall under their enchantment even today? The answer doesn't lie in the ring's power. It doesn't lie in the Goetia. It lies in the spiritual legacy Solomon left for those humble enough to listen. According to a hidden manuscript known as Clavicula Salomonis, the Secret Testament, before Solomon died, he left this message. I did not destroy them. I only restrained them so that one day humanity would see clearly that the danger is not in the power of darkness, but in the desire for darkness within their own hearts. And on that day, if even one person stands, not with a ring, but with true reverence, the seal will be restored. In other words, Solomon never intended to eliminate the 72 spirits, because they are living proof of the fall, of angels cast from the light, of the consequences of pride, and also of the sacred gift of free will that God gave humanity. If he destroyed them, then mankind would no longer have a choice. But because he allowed them to remain, mankind has a chance to choose what is right and be saved. These final words are not recorded in the canonical Bible, but they echo across ancient Jewish texts, Christian apocrypha, Kabbalistic traditions, and Sufi teachings. And they all agree on one thing. The key is no longer in the ring. The key is now in every soul, whether you will bow before the true light or be deceived by the false light of spirits who once betrayed heaven. Because they are still here, not in monstrous forms, not in terrifying faces, but in eloquent speech with twisted wisdom. In religion that's been distorted, in calls to power, in dreams of enlightenment without God, and in the hearts of those who believe they can control the world through knowledge, without ever learning obedience. Here's the message Solomon left behind. If I once sealed them with prayer, then let the final generation seal them with faith. When examining the journey of Solomon and the 72 Goetia spirits, the first mistake readers often make is assuming this is merely a mythological list of demons, an ancient occult story disconnected from our modern age. But from a spiritual perspective, this is not history. It is prophecy. Each spirit in Goetia symbolizes a fallen aspect of humanity. Pride, lust, compromise, corrupted knowledge, hunger for power, deception, and a faith turned into a tool. When humans stop viewing these as dangerous and begin calling them talent, enlightenment, or success, the seals aren't broken in heaven. They're broken inside the soul. The Ring of Solomon, as previously explained, was not just a tool of power. It was the symbol of spiritual authority granted through absolute obedience to the Most High. And that obedience did not come from intellect, it came from inner brokenness, a heart humbled in fear of God more than fear of darkness. Meanwhile, today's summoners have rituals, they have knowledge, they have ancient books, systems, methods, but they lack holiness. And that creates the perfect ground for the spirit Solomon once sealed to rise again, not through horrific manifestations, but through ideas, through education, culture, entertainment, and even theology. They don't need to be believed, they just need to be forgotten. forgotten that once there was a man because he feared God, who dared to seal them one by one through prayer. Today, the wave of esotericism, ancient magic, Goetia rituals, and Solomonic spells is flooding YouTube, TikTok, and pop culture. Even worse, many young people pursue Goetia not in fear but curiosity. And that is the most dangerous thing, because you can only fight what you recognize as evil. You cannot guard against what you believe is harmless. Solomon was not perfect. He fell, he compromised. But before that, he made a covenant. And through his example, both in faithfulness and in failure, our generation receives this warning. You are not safe from darkness because you're strong. You are only safe because you remain obedient. You think the 72 spirits of Goetia are just folklore. You think the rituals of summoning exist only in dusty books. You think those strange symbols, ancient names, and Solomon's ring have faded into obscurity? You're wrong. The world isn't silent, it's disguised. Everything Solomon sealed is returning today, not through form, but through ideology. It may be hidden in best-selling books, in popular music, in educational philosophies, in corrupted sermons preached inside churches, and in the minds of young people lured by knowledge without the fear of the Lord. You may not believe it, but your disbelief doesn't stop them, because the 72 spirits of Goetia don't need your belief. They only need your curiosity. So the question is, which side are you on? Will you be the one searching for the ring to use it for yourself? Or the one who rises to warn a generation unknowingly unlocking what Solomon once sealed? Solomon once used the ring to bind spirits, but today only uncompromised faith can shut the gate of darkness. If you feel this is more than just a story, if you see the world slipping into a false light, if you know someone walking the wrong path, don't stay silent. Share this video with them. Subscribe to the channel to uncover biblical secrets and real spiritual weapons. And most importantly, keep your heart pure, because today you might be the one carrying that invisible ring.